Many people claim that all the stories about Jesus are made up and that Jesus never existed. Today I will show you that none of this can be proven with facts and that Jesus is a real historical person who really existed. The Bible is not the only scripture that mentions Jesus and his crucifixion. Many non-Christian writings from that time report the same. One example of this is Tacitus. He wrote in his Annals in 116 AD. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. A well-known Jewish historian named Flavius Josephus wrote the following text in 93 AD, around 60 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. Eyewitnesses were definitely still alive at that time. About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. For he was one who performed surprising deeds and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. And when, upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate had condemned him to a cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life, for the prophets of God had foretold these things and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared. It's a great thing, isn't it? In fact, there's more. Flavius Josephus also mentions the execution of James under the Sadducean high priest Annas too. He therefore assembled the high council for judgment and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, named James, as well as some others, whom he accused of breaking the law and had them stoned. The Jewish Talmud also mentions the following. It is taught, on the eve of Passover they hung Yeshu, and the crier went forth for 40 days beforehand declaring that Yeshu is going to be stoned for practicing witchcraft, for enticing and leading Israel astray. Anyone who knows something to clear him should come forth and exonerate him. But no one had anything exonerating for him, and they hung him on the eve of Passover. There are also other Roman notes about Jesus. Suetonius, a Roman who was respected at the imperial court, wrote the following. The Jews, who were continually stirred up by a certain Chrestos, he drove out of Rome. Pliny also wrote about Jesus. As governor of Bithynia, today Izmit, Turkey, from around 111, Pliny was responsible for complaints from the population against Christians living there. In a correspondence with Emperor Trajan, which he later included in his 10-volume collection of letters, he obtained legal confirmation for his proceedings with them. He wrote, "To those who denied being or having been Christians, I recited the formula and had them invoke the gods and pray to your statue, with offerings of incense and wine, and also blaspheme Christ. Then, in my opinion, they could be released. For true Christians should not be forced to do any of this." They affirmed that their whole guilt or error consisted in the fact that they regularly gathered on a certain day before dawn to offer a song to Christ as God and to commit themselves by oath not to commit a crime, but to refrain from theft, robbery, adultery, unfaithfulness, embezzlement of entrusted property. All the more reason why I considered it necessary to use torture to find out the truth from two so-called servants. I found nothing but absurd, excessive superstition. For the plague of this superstition has spread not only through the cities, but also through the villages. But it seems possible to contain and eradicate it. The author Mara bar Serapion wrote the following as a prisoner of the Romans. What benefit did the Athenians derive from killing Socrates, for which they were repaid with famine and pestilence? Or the Samians from the burning of Pythagoras, since their whole country was covered with sand in an instant? Or the Jews from the execution of their wise king, since from that time on their kingdom was taken away from them? The wise king in this passage most probably refers to Jesus. The historian Thallus wrote a multi-volume historical work in Greek around the year 55. In it, he mentions the inexplicable darkness at the time of Jesus' death as a historical fact. Cf. Mark 15 verse 33, the Greek writer Phlegon of Trallius, died after 137, also does this in his chronicles. The Greek satirist Lucian of Samosata wrote around the year 170 about the death of Peregrinus Proteus, the Christians worshipped Peregrinus, after that other man whom they still worship, the man who was executed in Palestine because he had introduced this new secret cult. He was the first lawgiver of the Christians, who brought them to the conviction that they were all brothers among themselves, once they had converted and renounced the Greek gods, worshipped that crucified sophist and lived according to his commandments. Lucian did not mention the name Jesus or the title of Christian, described him contemptuously as a crucified sophist and, in context, made fun of the gullibility of Palestinian Christians who had fallen for a deceiver like Peregrinus. He knew nothing of the special message of Jesus and therefore could not have been familiar with the Gospels. However, he did know some basic features of the way of life of early Christians. Anyone who has now looked at all these points should at least no longer have any doubt that Jesus Christ really lived in this world. But the Gospels also bear witness to this. The Gospel of Mark, for example, is dated even by skeptics to the year 70, 40 years after the crucifixion. Many events from the life of Jesus are reported in this text. If you liked the video, please subscribe, it costs nothing.